Okay, so absolutely lovely to see you and welcome to everybody. So Diane, lovely to have you join us and I hope you can hear us all right. Good evening, are you well? Oh, we can't hear you, but your lips are moving. But you're well, good, got the thumbs up. That's lovely, nice to see you. Fabulous. So we're just starting off. I was just explaining this is the first of our series. So I'm going to try and, oh, if I can share my screen now, just bear with me. So hopefully you can all see my screen now. So I'm just going to go from the beginning. So yeah, so this is a collaboration of series, okay, from the four of so Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, Lincolnshire. I don't know if we've got anybody from Lincolnshire tonight. And for the RCGP. So thank you very much for joining. So the full series is 4 sessions between January and March. The first tonight, obviously, is thinking about preparing for and the practicalities of retirement. The second one is a workshop on psychological transitions in late career. The third session is going to be on finance and pensions demystified, thinking about the cloud judgment particularly, and getting your finance in order. And then the fourth and final one will be exploring opportunities and extending career. So this is not just about retirement and leaving. It may be that some of you out there are actually thinking, you know, how can I extend my career and what else can I do? So that's the four series. So we hope that you'll join us as for the other 3 if possible. So the outline for tonight's session is that Mr. Michael Wright is going to join us first of all. He's the Nottingham LMC Chief Executive, and then some of our local retired GPs and RCGP representatives are going to give us some experiences of their sort of route and journey into retirement and their late career journey. So with personal perspectives and top tips and hopefully some idea of the things that they would like you to know that they wish they had known previously as they were coming up towards late career and retirement. After this, we're going to go into some breakout rooms to discuss what you've heard. And I have got some questions that you can consider to get you starting thinking about late career and retirement. But first of all, I'm just going to, if I can stop sharing, just bear with me. There we go. So just in the way of trying to find out who's in the room, I've got a poll for people. So thinking about this, can everybody see the poll on the screens? Give me a thumbs up if you can see. Yeah, thanks, Janice. So lovely. So just 4 very, very quick questions, just to get a sense of who's in the room, okay, and what stage you're at. It would be lovely if you would just answer these. So I'm going to give you a couple of moments just to think about the answers, and then I'll bring up the results. Got some results coming in. That's great. Thank you, everybody. Hopefully everybody's getting logged into it okay. Brilliant. So I'm just going to give you a few more seconds just to finish that. And to get rid of my cat who may have brought a live mouse in. So bear with me a minute. So lovely. Hopefully everybody's had the opportunity to complete that. So let's have a look. Let's finish the poll and let's see what have we got. So, okay, so what is your current GP role? So the dominant group here is GP partners, actually. So 5 out of 12 who've answered. We've got some salary GPs, portfolio GPs, and 3 retired GPs. So everybody is welcome. Lovely to see you all. And so thinking about when do you intend to retire? So 2 of you are lucky enough to have already retired. We've got another 2 thinking of retiring the next 12 months. The majority of the group within the next 1 to 3 years. And then we've got some that it's a little bit more distant, but brilliant to have you with us. And thinking about your plans around retirement, okay, so it's a fairly even split. Some of you want to retire completely from work. Some of you are going to take your pension and carry on working. but some of you are going to retire but do some other related work. So interesting, nobody's wanting to do anything work-wise unrelated to medicine. Okay, and thinking about preparing for retirement and beyond, so setting the scene for Michael's talk here. Okay, a couple of you know absolutely nothing, so that's great. So hopefully expectations aren't too high here. We've got a little knowledge and some people know a lot, which is brilliant. So thank you for sharing that. Good. So let me get rid of that. So it's good to get a sense of where you are. So lovely to introduce Michael right now. So as I've said, Michael is the Nottingham LMC Chief Executive. And Michael is going to start to get you thinking about some of the practicalities, logistics and steps that you need to consider as you come to late career and thinking about retirement or leaving general practice. Okay, as I said before, we really want this to be interactive. So please feel free to put your hands up, put questions in the chat, or even just sort of unmute and ask questions. And Michael is very happy to take questions as we go along. So thank you very much, Michael. Come on in.
No problem. Thank you. And hi, everyone. Quite a few familiar faces. Yeah, so as Claire introduced there, the point of this is just to give you a bit of a heads up on a number of the practicalities that I think that it'd be worth you thinking about in terms of the steps prior to retirement, thinking about how to do that in a way that's joined up, that helps the practice if you're in a practice as well, to consider what they might want to do as well, and to think about your priorities really, and what's most important to you about how you retire. Because actually, if there's anything that we learn in the LMC, it's that quite often, GPs have had quite a long career, they come up to retirement, and they don't really know much about how to do it. And the practice, for some people, it's the first time they've had anyone retire for quite a while. So there's not really a process for a lot of people. So what I'm going to try and do is just demystify it a little bit, but also if you need more guided support after this at any point in the future, then please come to us and we can work with you more on an individual basis. But I will give you a bit of a heads up on what we think are really good things to consider. As Claire says, I love doing these in person, and I miss the interaction a bit. So if you would like to shout up or put anything in the chat as we go, then please do. I'll take questions throughout. I'll also have a little space at the end as well for anything that you'd like to pick up, and I'll answer as best as I can. Right. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint. I'm going to try not to make this too overpowering. Hopefully this will work. So here we go. Let's see. Let's get this going. And please tell me if you can see the first slide, or if somebody could. Yeah, has got hand up.
We can see it.
Thumb up. Okay. So the practicalities of retiring, leaving a practice. Can you see the next slide with my ugly mug on it? Yeah, okay. I wasn't sure if they were coming through or not. So just tell you who I am really. So just in terms of who's this bloke chatting away. So I've been in the LMC for 11 years, and it's almost 9 years I've been in charge. Took over from Chris Lock when he retired. I've been in practice management. I've been in CCGs for a short time. Worked in out of hours, and before I came into the NHS, I had 12 years. Actually, that is 12 years. It should say 2006 as a medic in the Air Force, which isn't a medic in your terms, but a medic in paramedic and kind of management terms. So I've always worked really in healthcare, almost from a kid, and with GPs for most of that time. Now, this is something that. No, this was a few years ago. This is 2022. If you can't see it, then I'll just talk through it very quickly. But this was Pulse saying in 2022 that half of the existing workforce were planning to retire at or before the age of 60. So, it wasn't that long ago when you would talk to GPs and they would say, well, I'll probably work up to 60, maybe even 65. But certainly not that many were looking to go too far before 60. Because they wanted to get full pension rights. They were reasonably happy with life, and they didn't see the need to go any earlier. A combination of factors, and you'll know this because you're in this journey now, but a number of factors have affected that. Burnout, workload problems, things around pension entitlement, what you can get for your annual allowance and lifetime allowance, etc. There's been lots of things here. There's a real pincer movement that has forced a lot of GPs to think of leaving a lot earlier than 60. So this was written 2.5 years ago. If anything, I think the situation's worsened in that time from what we see in the LMC. we did the 7A. This was a while ago now. This was, 7 years ago. However, it was interesting then to think that was 7 years ago. What's changed, and are we in the same place? Well, I think most of us consider that whilst it wasn't perfect in 17, it's really worsened a lot in terms of how it feels in general practice and what we're seeing with practice closures and the inability of GPs to get work. I certainly remember a few years ago when I was in practice management, we would have 4 or 5 partner candidates come forward for a partnership job. And now we're at a point where partners are getting a lot of people coming forward, but until about a year or so ago, or 2 years ago, they almost gave up on even advertising for partnerships because nobody was really interested. Salary GPs, again, a couple of years ago, it really was quite flat. And now we're in a position where we certainly know of a practice in Retford who advertised for a salary job and had, I think it was about 22 to 25 applicants, and really high quality applicants. And we know now of locums who can't work at all. So it's a really strange landscape we find ourselves in, where there's plenty of work to do. There's GPs who are finding it very hard to keep up, and we have unemployed GPs. So it's crazy. And it's because the practices don't have the funds to be able to expand the workforce to cope with their jobs. So this has worsened. We had 33 responses. The average age was 52. The youngest, horrifyingly enough, was 33. Now, maybe they were just keen to kind of start planning early, but I genuinely think they would already started thinking that, this certainly wasn't going to be something they did up until 60. The main drivers were workload, patient demand, which some would argue has risen, financial pressure, which has definitely worsened for many, and bureaucracy. Actually, so much paperwork and messing about you have to do. And CQC would have been part of that as well, regulation and the pressure of that, and having all these eyes on what you're doing. Of that makeup, 26 were partners, 5 were salaried, and 2 didn't say. And we talked about this with them. We talked about, how did you get here? Claire's already touched upon this with that first kind of poll, really. But what were the internal and external factors? Do you want to, is it really retirement? We actually hear a lot about GPs say that they want to retire. When they don't really want to retire, what they want to do is leave the partnership. So we often call it retiring from the partnership because that's often the language in the partnership agreements. All it really means is that we're going to leave the partnership and we're going to do something else. Have you considered sabbatical? So this was a discussion as well. I certainly managed in a practice where our partners had an agreement where they could take a 6-month sabbatical within a given period of time. So they were, really good about it and took time out to look at rostering that and looking at how they could cover that time. And we had GPs go for 6 months to go to India and other places around the world and have a complete break. Do you need new challenges? And if you could choose to work or live how you want, what would your life look like? So we always encourage when anybody talks to us about this to kind of go through all of these factors. But at that time, 7 years ago, things were always pretty tough. And if anything, the situation is definitely tougher for many people. So not surprising that a lot of people are interested in learning about what they can do on retirement. So again, this has been touched on, but I'm going to just go over it because these are, broadly speaking, your options. So retiring from the partnership and the GP performance list. So obviously, you can still practice as a GP as long as you're on the GP performance list. But if you retire from the partnership and the GP performance list, that's much more final. You can retire from the partnership and stay on the performance list to do non-partnership work. So whether that's going into salaried, portfolio, locum, it's quite funny really with a lot of the work we do, and I'm sure Claire must see it a little bit through Phoenix as well, where we do a lot of naming people by what they do as a GP. So you're a partner, you're salaried, you do out of hours, you do this. Actually, an awful lot of GPs we know truly a portfolio, because they often do secondary bits of work. They do some GP with special interest work. They do some education and teaching and research outside of the partnership. So they are partners, but equally they could call themselves portfolio GPs. So I think we're really careful in the LMC to try not to look at GPs in their different kind of modes, because people move between them all the time. People go from salary to locum to partners, and sometimes they're all of those at the same time. But obviously, when it comes to the logistics of leaving, it does depend on what you are doing at the time as to what you need to do. So we will cover a little bit of that. Retiring from the partnership, but only for a short time. So a 24-hour retirement and staying on the performers list to do non-partnership work. So again, there are different options there. So you could leave the partnership and kind of take a break in terms of being able to take your pension, but keep going on the performers list. And some people would choose to do that and go away and do non-partnership work. Equally, GPs might take a 24-hour retirement to access their pension, but come back to the partnership and stay on the performers list. So in effect, they're not really retiring as we would call it from the practice, but technically from a pension point of view, they're taking their pension benefits and then they go back to work. And technically, you need to take a break, and then there's a period of time before you can kind of go back to the full hours that you might have done before. So there is a limit on how many hours you can work after that. I'm not going to go into that. I think that's for another session, and we can work through that on an individual basis if anybody wants to talk about 24-hour retirement. But it's another option. So I guess it's what retirement means to you. If you've already decided, then this is simple. If you're thinking about it, then there are quite a few options open to you. So I just wanted to let you know that we see all of those at play, all at different points. They're all possible. Again, please jump in at any time if anybody wants to pick up on any of these slides, or I can go back at any point.
Can I just come in for a moment there, Michael?
Yeah, of course, Claire. Yeah.
Yeah, it just reminded me actually, just to bring up the retained GP scheme. I don't know how many people in the room know about this, but this is something that people are looking more and more at. I think historically, probably people thought that retained GP scheme was really for sort of female GPs who are on mat leave, who are coming back into practice. But more and more, we're seeing people coming towards the end of their career who actually want to step away from the burdens of sort of full time or multiple sessions of either partnership or salaried or portfolio. But actually the retained GP scheme is to keep people working in general practice who are thinking of leaving, and they can do, it used to be up to 4 sessions, it used to be 1 to 4, but since COVID it can be more than that if required. But it's a really nice scheme actually, which is generally supported by the ICB, and it has to be for people who are thinking about leaving. It has to be for people where they need some sort of educational and supportive ongoing support, I suppose. And it's worth looking at, okay, because there are mutually beneficial sort of things for both the practice and for the GP. So you've got sort of for the practice, they actually get paid a certain amount for each session that you work. And as a GP working there, you also get protected CPD time and things. So it can work really very nicely. But you have to have a practice that will know about this, but many of them don't. So I will send resources around about this, and also the local lead, who is Dr. Lisa Steiner, in case anybody's interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you, Claire. And I guess the good thing is that there are options. There's lots of options. Even once you retire, if you still want to be doing stuff that keeps you involved or uses your skills. So, actually the amount of GPs that we've had come to us who are thinking about retirement in the last year or two, offering to do project work. For some of those, it's useful that they're still on the performers list, but not always. In some cases, it's more the skills that they've got from the career that they've had that are useful, irrespective of whether they stay on the list or not. So if you still want to do work following retirement, then if you let us know of that, then that's something that we might be able to help you with. And certainly the Phoenix program, and a lot of the work to kind of get the Phoenix program going in the early days relied on portfolio GPs and GPs who were thinking of retiring and wanting to give back and do teaching and mentorship and etc. And that's been really beneficial. I'm just checking if there's anything on the chat. So okay, so there's a discussion there. I think you've already answered that, Claire, so I won't go back to that. Okay, I'll keep going then. So, okay, practicalities of leaving. So I guess the question I'm going to pose to you, and this is probably the interactive part, but it's really about who do you tell? So I'd like to not tell you off a list. I'd like to get them all covered and then I can go through them. So any ideas, please, from the audience as to who should you tell you're leaving, that you're retiring? Who needs to know? And I'll tell you when I think we've got them. I can't actually see the chat, Claire. So if anybody puts anything in the chat, then if you wouldn't mind
I'll
shouting
keep
it
an
out.
eye on the chat, but don't be shy, anybody. Oh, partners, thank you. And CQC.
Partners, CQC, yes, yes. I've got a number more, quite a few more.
The practice manager.
Okay, yeah. Who else are you going to tell?
We've got ICB and PCSE.
Yep, yep. They're all on the list, absolutely.
Your own family.
Your own family. Ooh. I'm going to ask you what order you do all of this in, but that's going to be very difficult, isn't it? Yeah, your own family, absolutely.
We've got the revalidation office and the practice performers list and an NHSE.
Okay, great. Okay. So I guess let's talk through some of these then. So the partners. So this is an interesting one, and for anybody who's done this, if anybody wants to talk about this themselves, about how they've experienced it, how it was received, how they even did it. Did you tell one partner? Did you tell the one you're friendliest with, or is there someone you still see as the senior partner and you went to them, or did you do it in a meeting? So again, just the practicalities. Really have a think about this, because I think a good retirement or a transition into retirement is dependent on how you would really like it to go. But these are all really useful things to think about. So in terms of telling the partners, I'd say one thing you need to do on that one is to have a look at the partnership agreement. And I'm going to come on to that in a little bit more detail. But I think that, look at the partnership agreement, see whether there's any clauses on there, because actually it also depends on whether anybody else is retiring or has retired recently as to when you might be able to retire, but also about what your rights are with retirement and what you need to make sure you're protected for. And indeed, if you're not protected, if you don't know about it, you might not look for it. So on this one, if you're a partner, by all means talk to the partners, but do give us a shout if you're worried at all about what your rights are and what you need to look out for, because there's actually a lot that comes up post-retirement for partners that we've had certainly through our office in the last year or two that I can share a bit more on. But think about it, who do you tell? Tell the partners. But how do you want to do it? Most of the time they have an inkling. Most of the time it's been a bit of a creep for a while and they're not surprised. Occasionally it's a complete shock and they'll try and stop you doing it. So you might just want to think about that. How do you get yourself ready? Do you want to do it through the manager, or would you rather tell the partners at once, or do you want to tell them all individually, have a little chat? So who do you tell? But in brackets should be how, really. And equally, anyone jump in, please, at any of these points to comment or to ask questions. The staff, again, I'm not putting this in any particular order, so please don't take this as a checklist, because a lot of people will do this in their own time and in their own order. David, I think your hand's up.
Yeah, I was just thought I might respond to the bit about partners. I mean, I retired quite a while ago, but it was a matter of conversation where we were having coffee and that sort of thing. So everybody knew what I was thinking. And so they knew what was coming. And then I had to write them a letter, which was one of the most difficult letters I've ever written. But the question was, did I say anything more than I'm going to retire on this day? Or did I have to say, it's been lovely working with you all these years? And in the end, I just said, I'm going to retire on, the 30th of June, 2015 it was. And that was it. So I found it. The pain I had was in making the decision. To say it's a hard letter to write, because once you've done it, there's no way back. So I think it tends to put you off a bit actually doing it. But then when you've done it, because I had to give them 6 months notice, I thought, having done that and got over that hurdle, I thought, God, wouldn't it be nice if I could go now rather than work the 6 months? Anyway, that was my experience.
How did they receive it, David? How do you remember what the reaction was?
I think I mentioned it several times. I've been there for 30 years plus, so they were expecting it, really. And we had several parties at the end and all the rest of it, but it was my decision. I mean, they supported me in that, and I still meet up with them. In fact, I'm having a meeting tomorrow with 3 of them for lunch.
Right.
friendships that have continued.
Great, excellent. Okay, that's really good to know.
Mm.
Yeah, so as David said, you know, often there will be the kind of the very formalized part of writing and requesting, because that's going to be around, you know, some of the legalities of leaving the practice, and that was of your own free will. You decided to do it, you know, voluntary leaving the practice, and what that means then in terms of, you know, the partnership agreement, provided you've got a partnership agreement. So I'm saying it presuming that the partners in the virtual room have got partnership agreements. If you're not sure, please find out. Ask your manager if they've got a copy. If you know you've got one but you haven't looked at it for a while, please have a look before you do anything, just to make sure that you're aware of what's in there in terms of clauses and obligations. But I will go into that in a little bit more detail. Who do you tell? Staff? Yeah, I mean, often people find that really hard. I've known partners who they're the people they've found it hardest to tell, because of the closeness that they've got with some of them. And I know in some cases they can be related to members of staff. That's come up a few times. Equally, we've had it where they've retired from a practice, but not necessarily from general practice entirely, and they've retired and gone to another practice. And then some of the staff have followed them. So that, again, quite interesting that some of this, whilst we're thinking about the individual who's retiring, can actually have quite a big effect on a number of people, and change all. And this isn't about putting any kind of responsibility on you not to do this, because you should do what's right for you. But you know, it can be quite destabilizing. So talking to the partners, talking to the staff for different reasons, but really, you know, some care really about how that's done, so that people feel that they understand and they can ask their own questions. There might be some very practical questions as well as emotional ones at that time. PCSE, Primary Care Support England. So somebody mentioned that one. So yeah, of course, there's a lot around that in terms of performers list. And I'm kind of including that really in terms of thinking about those things around the performance list around appraisal as well, and etc. revalidation. So can kind of expand that, but they definitely need to know. NHS Pensions Agency. So there are forms. It used to be the AW8 form, but I can double check that. But certainly quite a length, well, reasonably lengthy form that you need to fill in to actually action this and to make this happen. Marilyn, did you want to come in?
Yeah. Am I on mute? I'm not, am I?
No, I can hear you.
Good. Just to say at this point, you mentioned about the performers list. I'd really recommend it's not coming off the performance list, or considering it really carefully, not just doing it as a reflex action, because if there are things you want to do afterwards, even a lot of voluntary type roles might require that, which is it's just don't come off till you know what you really gonna do, is one of my take-home messages.
Good advice, Marilyn. Yeah, I absolutely agree. There are quite a lot of things that, even though there might be admin type roles or not so clinical facing, you might still need to be on the performers list just because of your role and responsibilities. So yeah, I agree with Marilyn. I think unless you're completely certain that you're definitely not going to do anything else that requires you to be on the list and be a GP, even if it's not face-to-face work, then be a little cautious about when you do that. And of course, it doesn't mean you can't access the pension. So, you know, that doesn't go hand in hand necessarily. Jane, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, there are very specific jobs you can do with very specific types of registration. So there are some jobs where you obviously need to be on the performance list. There are some jobs where you just need to be on the have a registration and have a license to practice. And there are some jobs where you actually can, which you can do with just GMC registration, such as being benefit on the benefits advisory panel or something like that. You know, to be a medical examiner, for example, you need a license to practice, but you don't to be medical examiner, benefits on the benefits panel. Anyway, but if you want to practice anything clinically, then you're going to have to be on the performance list.
Yeah, really good. So actually, the more you hear, hopefully you're realizing that, you know, it's about that clarity, isn't it? About why you're retiring, what it is you're retiring from, and what you want to do afterwards. So almost kind of planning way past the actual date that you serve your notice, but what is it you're going to do next, and what do you need to allow you to do it? So it may well be that you need to stay on the list. Okay, so the pension. So yeah, and absolutely. Hopefully, you've been aware of what you can claim, and you'll be aware of what you're entitled to, what kind of pot you've built up, and you can get statements to get that. And again, get financial advice if you need to, get some support with that to make sure you're maximising it. NHS England. So again, kind of that's linked more again to the performance and the appraisal side of things. The ICB. So there's a few reasons for contacting the ICB. One of the obvious ones really is around if you are in partnership. And there's quite a difference in terms of how the ICB view you depending on what contract your practice is on. So without going down the too boring route, if you're on a GMS contract, which most practices are, then that's your national contract, and the partnership are the entity that NHS England and the ICB ultimately has the contract with. They're in contract with you as a partnership if you're GMS. If you're PMS, which we've still got a few practices on, then they're actually in partnership with those individual GPs. So the contract is held by the GPs, albeit that they might enact it through a partnership in the surgery, but they're actually in contract directly with the ICB as partners. So that's different. They're actually a contract holder. And we have to make sure that when you're looking at your contracts and your partners' agreements, that you're not actually dissolving the partnership by retiring. Because if you haven't made very clear in your partnership agreement what it means when a partner goes, it is possible that you could be in effect dissolving the partnership. And then you have to then think, well, what does that mean? What do we need to put in place to avoid that happening? So you do need to talk to the ICB about that from a contract, certainly from a contract holding point of view, because you might be the contract holder. And if you're a single hander, then they will need to think about what to do with your practice. And if you're certainly, if it's a practice that's well served by other practices in your area, it might be they decide to let your patients move on and disperse to other practices locally. The bigger the practice and the more rural, then there's more chance that they might look at an alternative way of providing care to your patients. So again, depending on whether you're in partnership, depending on which contract your partnership is on, that's going to be slightly different as to how that happens from a process point of view. The practice accountant, that we see a lot of problems when partners leave and it's not clear how their accounts have been made up and at what point they can access their money. So please do talk to the practice accountant. Take your own advice if you want as well, but certainly make sure the practice accountant's aware and get them prepped on it really, so that they can start thinking about how they're going to allocate your share of what you're due from the practice accounts. And think about when you would get it. Do you want to time your retirement so that you're going to get your share of the accounts fairly soon afterwards? We've seen situations where somebody's retired and it's taken the best part of the year before they can see any money back from the practice and get their worth from the practice. So again, that's well worth thinking about in terms of, what would you get? How would it be calculated? When would you be allowed to take it? Because normally in the partnership agreements, they're built to make sure that the partnership isn't destabilized. So they're going to make sure that if somebody exits the partnership, that they don't take the money too quickly at a time when it's really difficult for the practice. They're going to try and make sure that it's in a way that, they can manage that, and there's clauses within the agreement to do that. Did you see people have mentioned that? So again, they want to know who's in partnership for the practice, who's liable, who the registered manager is, etc. So CQC will need to know if you're going. Medical defence organisations, I'm not sure if anybody mentioned that. We've obviously got the clinical negligence scheme, the national scheme that's been there for a little while now, but still we get GPs who have got kind of run-off cover and different types of cover that they go separately for through the MDOs. So if you've got that, then talk to them about your decision. Make sure you're not paying for any subscriptions beyond the time you need it. HMRC. So obviously for most people, it's being effectively self-employed. Even if you are working in partnership, you're self-employed most of the time. And that means that you've got tax implications. So what does that mean for you in terms of HMRC? What do they need to know about you leaving that post? And is there a particularly good time to go because of tax, because of accounts, because of the financial flows? So all of these things should be in your mind when you're thinking about how to go and when. And the patients, I think that's probably the last one I've put on there. Again, as to when you do that, completely up to you. Again, people find that quite hard sometimes, particularly where they've known patients and families for a long time. And, you know, and some patients have found that quite distressing because they built up that relationship, that continuity of care. So again, you know, how do you want to do that? How do you want to tell the patients? Some people want to go quietly. They just want it put on the website, Dr. Such and Such left our practice last week. Other people want to have buffets and open house kind of events or whatever. You know, there's no right or wrong, is there? It's up to you in terms of how you want that to work. But again, best if you have it the way you would like it, to give you the best chance of it. If you like enjoying that retirement, if that's the right word for it. So patients, yeah, absolutely. So again, no particular order, although I would say that a lot of the logistic ones in the middle, you probably need to think about before you tell the partners, the staff and the patients, because that might determine when you do it. So it's really getting all your ducks lined up and then thinking, right, now I'm going to tell people this is my plan. Because it could be that you tell your partners or your staff, and then you look into the logistics and go, blimey, I don't think I should be retiring for another year yet or 18 months yet. So, God, I wish I hadn't said anything now. I might just have to row back a bit and go, actually, no, I'm not going to go now. So, you know, early warning is useful for the partnership just from a point of view of succession planning. So even if you're really committed to do it, but it might not be for a while, it is probably worth you mentioning it to the partners. But you've got to make that decision for yourself as to how long before you want to go, you want to tell people. So I would do the middle bits first. I would do the PCSE, the pensions, NHSE, the accountants and all of that. I would do that first before thinking about when you're going to tell people finally, because that's when you're going to know the date to go. Jane.
I put this in the chat. I found the most difficult part about retiring was telling the patients. Partners were fine. They didn't want me to go, which was gratifying. But telling the patients was absolutely awful because they made me feel like I was abandoning them and letting them down, and it was just so emotionally draining. So in fact, what I did, I didn't tell them probably for I just left it about a month before I was leaving, because I couldn't have coped for any longer than that. But don't underestimate the emotional effect it has.
How did you do it, Jane, out of interest? How did you do it logistically?
I mean, I think I just told people. Did
you announce it on a website or put it in a newsletter or in the practice?
Just as people came in, and then the message percolated, and then yeah. And there are different ways of doing it. I know Marilyn, for example, had a different way of doing it, but yeah, I think you have to do whatever feels right for you.
Yeah. I mean, I sent a letter. I put a letter out, you know, on reception. That's one thing I did. But the other thing, just to be aware of, if you are in a long-term relationship with patients, then you have to be prepared that your consultations are going to take a bit longer because when they first become aware that you're going, because they want to make plans as to who's going to follow them up and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I certainly worked in the practice at one point where you could almost predict how the clinic would look, because a lot of it was follow-ups from the same GP, and it was maybe 2 weeks on or whatever it was, and the clinics often looked almost the same. And I thought, well, when that partner retires, that's going to be really traumatic potentially to a number of the patients who have regularly seen them and almost built up a kind of, we will only see that person, we won't see anybody else. So you know, and what kind of handover did they get and how did that work? And that's where continuity of care comes in, doesn't it? We talk about this an awful lot and the benefits of that. And that's one of the key arguments the BMA are trying to put to the government, that's why general practice is a partnership, based on the partnership model. Not everybody wants to be partners, but based on the partnership model is still a good model for continuity of care. And a lot of patients find that, well, healthy and from a psychological point of view as well as medical. David, how did you tell the patients, by the way? On the spot?
Yeah, sort of word, a bit like Jane, really. It was word of mouth. I did. There were a number of patients who, you know, as you say, that I used to look after, and I told them I was going to retire. So the discussion became around how they were going to continue their care. And since I live in Belper, the word gets round in about 3 days. So people were coming up to me in the street and saying, "Oh, you're retiring." So that really was all that needed to be done for me, and it sort of worked. Inevitably, there were some people who didn't realise after I'd gone, but I would have, you know, I was sort of retired quietly sort of person rather than all the other. But it is a wrench, and since I still live in Belper, I still bump into people, you know, usually when I'm in Morrison's shopping, and I can catch up on what's happened to them because they love to tell me.
Okay, so the practicalities then. So this is my suggested list. I'm sure there's a few more, and I think there was 1 or 2 more that were mentioned there when we did a bit of a kind of quiz at the start. So this isn't exhaustive, but please do think about these. And as I say, I think the majority of them outside the partners stuff and staff and patients are the ones to do early, so that you can then determine when you do it and how, because you need to get your ducks lined up. Okay, I'm planning to leave and leave them well. So what do I mean by this? So these are things that I think are useful for you to do in your practice, and some of it is partnership actions. But you know, actually, the partnership might not always think about this. So it might be useful that when you're talking about exit, that you consider this with your partners as well. Some of this will be relevant to salaried and portfolio and locums as well. So I'm using partner a lot with the language, but you'll be able to relate this to yourself as well, I'm sure, in cases. So examine the partnership agreement to determine the length of notice and the method of serving this. How and when do you take your stake out of the practice? So again, I think David mentioned 6 months, I think it was. So for a lot of practices, 6 months is quite standard, really, in the partnership agreement, because it's, you know, it's a considerable strain, really, to replace. It's not always easy to replace a partner, so the maximum amount of time they've got to do it. Equally, and I don't know whether David tried this, but if you want to go earlier, I have heard of partnerships where they've said, well, that's what it says in your partnership agreement, but if we can find a replacement earlier, or if we can come to arrangements about changing your sessions or the way that you work, then effectively you could start to go a little bit earlier. But again, that's a negotiation. So whatever it says in your partnership agreement is what they can hold you to as the partners. But you might be able to agree something that's different to that, and it's worth going for if it's important to you. David, would you like to come back in?
Just say that it said 6 months in our practice agreement, so I just worked towards that. I told them I was thinking about it, but obviously, as you say, I had to check my pension and with the accountant and all the rest of it. And I said, well, I'll confirm it when I know, but this is what I'm thinking of, and that was it, really. There was no, I didn't feel, it never crossed my mind actually to leave earlier, having known all the other stuff about my pension and what have you, and they didn't offer. Now, had I asked, I think probably they would have been, you know, they would have said okay, basically, because we did have some people at that time who were looking forward to taking over from me. So
yeah, so your starting point is your partnership agreement. That says what you're meant to do, but yeah, obviously what you want to do is subject to negotiation. Yeah. Thanks, David. Jane, did you want to come back?
Well, I was just going to say my partnership agreement said 6 months as well. I wanted to retire on my 60th birthday, which was in August. But I was senior partner. One of my junior partners picked me at the post and got in before me, so I had to wait for another couple of months after the 6 months. It was all right. It was fine. In fact, it became quite neat because I then retired in October, which is exactly 27 years after I joined. So that was fine in the end.
Wow.
Actually, I'd have been a bit upset if they'd suggested that I might like to go earlier. I think.
I mean, this was it, isn't it? This is what Amina think about leaving well. I mean, in an ideal world, this would all be mutually agreed. This would all be that we've looked at the agreement. And again, that conundrum you mentioned there about, well, what if somebody else then got in? I'm thinking about retirement. I haven't said anything. Somebody else slaps it in on the door, on the desk, and you think, oh no, I've got to wait 6 more months now, because a lot of the clauses are that you need to give 6 months between partners leaving. So I've got to wait a further 6 months after that person's left, and they're just serving it now. But again, if you get that happen, I'd encourage a chat with the other partner who's looking to go, and talk to the colleagues as well, your other partners, and say, look, how can we work this out? Is there a way that we can do something here? If you don't want to be delayed for the extra 6, it's all open to negotiation. And I think in my experience, partners aren't always ready for that, because they hopefully don't get too many around the same time. It isn't normally like that, but occasionally it does, and it's subject to negotiation. So when I talked about taking your stake out of the practice, that's the whole thing, as I mentioned earlier, really, about, you've normally built up a value in the partnership. So that comes back down to things like the assets in the practice. There's things you own and you have a stake in, the equipment that kind of devalues over time, but it's still got some capital value. These are all things that you might have as part of your kind of proportion of what's going on in the practice and what part you own of it. I know in practices I was in as a practice manager, it was based on the number of sessions you did. I think we had something like 36 sessions between 3 GPs doing 6 each or whatever it was. So they got a 6. They kind of split it up between them. They got their sessions worked out, so that was their proportion. So they kind of worked it out on a fair share proportion. And if they changed their sessions, they obviously got more of the share or less of the share. We've equally had practice managers who have been partners, and they've had almost like a half share, which has been interesting. So they haven't got the same. A share for them is worth 50% of a share that the partner had, because they're not a GP. So again, I've seen all sorts of things on this one. But again, just talk to them about it, check the partnership agreement. What's my stake? Normally that will get calculated by the accountants, and it will be agreed how you're going to take that out and at what point. But look for clauses. Look about the minimum term between partners retiring. 6 months is common. What about obligations in the future? So we've had this a number of times in the last 6 months now. Well, the last 12 months. We had one where it was an example where there were overpayments made to the practice because of the ICB and because of PCSE. And so they realized they'd made errors on things like, there was one that was around payments for rent reimbursements. There was another one around the contract changing from PMS to GMS. So when that happens, it's a really difficult situation, because effectively it is a little bit like when you put your cash card into the machine and you look to draw out £20 and you get £200. So you can pocket it and keep quiet and hope that nobody notices. But eventually the bank might say, hang on, I think we gave you £180 more than what you were meant to take, so we need that back. And we've been involved in that in terms of helping to try and negotiate, either to get it written off, which, to be honest, hasn't normally been very successful, especially in today's current climate in terms of the finances with the ICB. But the other bit is around negotiating a payment term that seems fair for the practice to pay it back. And why I'm mentioning it is because sometimes it relates to the period where a retired partner was working as a practice. So then we've had to look at it at practice level and go, okay, so the practice says to me, all right, I've only been in partnership here for 3 months. Most of this debt was done by the previous partners and they've retired. What are my rights? And then I've said to them, well, what did it say in the partnership agreement when they left? And what was written to the partner who left in the retirement? Was there a retirement agreement or deed or letter, or, how was it? What was communicated between the GP who left and the current partners to make sure that it was clear that if they had any obligations that came up about their time in practice, that they would have to service them? Or is there an option in the partnership agreement for a clean break? From the moment that I've left the partnership, you can't pursue me for anything. So these are things you might want to look at. Would you be liable if anything came up in the future related to your time in partnership? Or is there a way of saying, look, when I'm out, I'm out? And of course, then the practicality falls upon the practice to find you anyway, we've had examples where they can't find a retirement partner for many reasons. So it's a very tricky one, and a lot of GPs find it very difficult, ethically and morally, to want to go after previous partners for stuff that's happened in the past. Probably relies a lot on what the amount is, as to how fervently that they'll chase that up. Marilyn, did you want to come in on this?
Yeah, just to say that it was several years after I retired that I got asked to pay £90 for some bill or other from the accountant.
This happens quite commonly, I'm afraid. This happens commonly. £90, you've done all right, but certainly we've
Yeah,
seen.
no, but it just seemed.
It's odd though, isn't it? Because you feel like you've left, you feel you've got closure, and suddenly something comes out of the blue. But
I said that I was happy to pay it as long as they were paying. If they had things that were surplus, unexpected surpluses, that I would have a share of that as well.
Well, yes, exactly. Yeah, I'd like that as well. I'd like the good bits too, please. Yeah, good point. We are dealing with some issues around this at the moment. There are partnerships that are having a lot of problems around this with former partners because of how the money was divided at the time when they left and what was written down. So I would pay really close attention to that bit. Make sure you understand when you get your stake out, what you're due. So you've got to agree the payments. I've had it now where people have gone for over a year from a partnership and are still trying to get the right agreed amount back from the partners, and they've left. So it's a really awkward situation. So please, that I would urge you to really take time out on if you're in a partnership. Make sure that you're very clear on what you're due, when you're due it, and could you be due it in the future? Is there an obligation in the future if something else comes up after I've left? It's worth asking that and getting it documented. You need to be bought out. So again, particularly relevant if you're a co-owner, or if you're whatever. If you've got a stake in the building, normally that's what that means. We used to have something called goodwill, where there was almost a monetary value almost in the work that you did. That was outlawed as a thing quite a while ago. But certainly the idea of, if you're an owner or a co-landlord or whatever of a partnership of a building, it may be that you need somebody to buy that part of your commitment to the building out, unless, and some people do this, unless you want to keep that stake in the building even after retirement, and that does happen. And we have a number of retired GPs who are owners of practice buildings, and they lease them out to the practice, and that happens too. So again, you might want to think about that. Retirement might not mean pulling yourself completely away financially from the practice if you've got assets or a stake in the business that you want to keep in. Yeah, that's possible. And again, subject to agreements with your colleagues. Marilyn, your hand's up. Sorry, did you mean it to stay up, or is that a new one? No, okay. So yeah, do think about that. If you are a part owner, if you've got a stake in the building, do you want to leave it? Do you need somebody to buy you out? Do you want to stick with it? And some practices, and I don't want to confuse it too much, but just to kind of make this clear, what some practices do is that they have partners who don't want to be part of the owning the building, but they want to be partners. So what some partnerships do is they'll form a limited company for almost a holding company for the building. So they'll say, actually, you've got the partnership to run the practice and to be the business of the practice, but two of you don't want to be owning the building. So we're going to form a company for those who do want to own it, and that's going to be the owners of the building, and then we're going to lease it to our own partnership. So in a sense, you're a partner and you're in a lease with a few of your partners who own the building. So there are lots of different ways of doing this. So all I'd say there is that if you have got a stake in your building, just think about it and talk about it with your colleagues. What would be best for me to do here? And then you're looking at valuations for the building and then thinking about what percentage is yours. So it is more complicated if you're a part owner, but again, you can leave a stake in, you can take it out, but sometimes you need to be bought out, and that might delay your exit. Discuss how you wish to leave and inform the patients and other stakeholders. So that's really that previous slide. You'll have an idea, and sometimes the partners or the people in the practice might might actually not be in favour of the way you want to do it, and they might want you to do it in a different way. So sometimes that can be a tricky one. You know, you've got what you'd like to do, but actually for some of your colleagues, you know, it's really being able to do that in a way that they're happy with and it works for them. And hopefully you can work that one out. Get support. So I guess, you know, there's the bit here around the support pre-retirement, the support you can get in terms of thinking about when you want to do things. There's the Phoenix program, there's the GPS scheme, there's colleagues, talk to people who have done it, or talk to people who are thinking of doing it and learn from them. There's a GP support service. We used to call this the Pastoral Network. And again, that's something that's available for free to GPs in Nottinghamshire. So there's quite a few bits of support, but also, you know, that transition across to whatever you're doing next, it might be useful to access this kind of support through that as well, to almost have that guiding hand to help you through the process, because it can be difficult, even if it's the thing you want to do and you know it's the right thing to do for you. It's still a big life change for many people, so getting support with that may well be beneficial. Practically, this is more for the practice, but it might be worth being aware of. Checking any documents that are signed by the leaving partner to ensure that they don't go out of date, i.e. PGDs, HR policies, processes, things that you show the CQC when they come along, but it's got your name on it and you left 2 years ago. You know, so it's that kind of stuff. Just check that things that you're named on get taken off when you leave, because it's quite easy to leave them on and not review it. Ensure any policies or benefits at partnership level reflect the change: mortgages, loans, leases, insurance, bank, contracts. I didn't put contracts on there, but you sometimes have leases and contracts for things like phone systems, office equipment, photocopiers, all the rest of it, that might be signed at partnership level. Equally, sometimes it's in individual names. So again, if you've done it on behalf of the partnership, you don't want that staying on once you've left. Amend the stationery, simple stuff really. You know, some practices still have the names of doctors on their letterheads, have the names listed all on the website, etc. You've got your smart card, your IT accounts, you know, returning equipment, etc. So there's quite a lot there practically to think about in terms of what happens when you're going and when you've left the practice. So there's quite a lot of work there for the practice to do. And that equally applies in some cases to salary GPs and sometimes locums as well, depending on how involved they are in the practice. Refresh the partnership agreement when a new partner joins. Now, when I say refresh, I effectively mean do a new one and base it on the old one, but don't just use the old one and just try and get a squiggle on the old one. Actually refresh it. Look at all the terms in the partnership agreement. Think about whether that is still fit for purpose. And when a new partner joins, you really want them to be part of a new way forward. And it might be very similar to the previous partnership agreement, but what we don't like seeing, and we see it occasionally, but we see it where maybe somebody's name's almost scrubbed off and then there's a new name put on it and it's the same agreement. Equally, we see it where a new partner joins and the old partnership agreement is still there, but the new partner hasn't been put on it. So again, the best thing to do with any partnership is that when a partner leaves and a new partner is coming in, is to draw up a new one. And you might base it on the old one and use the wording, but tweak a little bit, but do a new one and refresh it and make sure everybody's aware of what's in that agreement. Because often you only look at the agreement when something goes wrong. And for some partners, that might be 5, 10, 15 years since they've looked at the partnership agreement. So that needs refreshing when somebody leaves and somebody comes in. To say really about our support, and I'll stop sharing in a minute and obviously could take questions or anything that came up in the chat, but I don't want to take too much of your time. But we're here for anything that you get really. We're here as the LMC. I hope you know who we are and how to get hold of us. Local Medical Committee. We're your representative body for all GPs across Nottinghamshire. Simple as that really. And if you're not in Nottinghamshire, you've got an LMC in your area as well. So we've got the website. We also work closely with Plexus Support. Plexus are the kind of overarching vehicle that houses the Phoenix program and GPS and the LMC buying group, and we're kind of part of a big family, if you like. So please contact us on the phone or through the liaison inbox. We've also, with the admin, and we started up that big WhatsApp Nottinghamshire group. That's good for general discussion, but equally, if you want individual discussions about your situation and you want some help, give us a shout. We'll do what we can. We'll signpost you to the help if it's something that we need extra support and expert help on. But I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm happy to pick up anything that came up in the chat, Claire, or any questions people might have.
Thanks very much, Michael. That was really helpful and really inspiring and thought-provoking. I think we've covered a lot of the stuff in the chat, but anybody got any questions? Oh, Gail, come on in.
The other thing, excuse me, that is really difficult to change is if you want to change the sort of nomenclature on your Teams account. So as you're probably aware, you can keep your NHS email address as long as you're using it. If you have a lapse of more than 90 days, then I think you get wiped off, but you can keep using it. But if, like me, you're retired from practice and your heading always used to say Gail Walton, Littlewick Medical Centre, and you want to change it, it's incredibly difficult to change it. And I've heard of people who have been advised one way of doing it, have done it, and have lost a huge amount of email and other stuff. So not just Teams, forgive me, Outlook generally. So beware and take good advice, I think, is my advice.
Good advice, Gail.
Jane.
Just following on from that, it's in my experience again, it's actually 28 days. If you haven't logged into your NHS account, they start wiping things. I lost a huge amount of documents. I went over to New Zealand over Christmas 22-23. Came back to find everything had just been wiped. Thank you very much, and there was nothing I could do about it. So yeah, beware. I don't know if that's the same in GP land. This is when I was obviously officially working with Sherwood Forest as a trust, but that was the policy. So beware, beware.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anything that's come up from the discussion so far? So if that's okay, thanks so much, Michael. We really appreciate it. As I say, very, very thought-inspiring and thought-provoking. So we appreciate your time. I know you need to disappear off, but we'll circulate certainly around the PowerPoint and all of your contact details as well. So if anybody thinks of something later, then feel free to get back in touch. But thanks.
My pleasure. My pleasure, and good luck, everyone. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So if I can just introduce Gail. Most people here may well know Gail already, but Gail's going to talk first of all about her kind of perceptions, experiences, okay, in the lead up to her kind of end of career journey and retirement. Gail is a retired GP from Derby, and she's retention lead for the Derbyshire Hub Plus and does a lot of work there. And so Gail, over to you.
Thanks, Claire. Good evening, everybody. A lot of what I was going to say was around the theme of leaving well, and a lot is stuff that Michael's already covered, and Claire's introduced me. I must say I found it incredibly useful because although I was a GP partner for 34 years, I had always done other stuff. So I'd been on the LMC, I'd been a GP appraiser from when appraisal started. I'd done a little bit of performance review work and then got involved with Hub Plus when it was initially GP Task Force before it merged with the Training Hub. And I think that having that sort of portfolio aspect is incredibly useful when you retire from clinical general practice. So I still do probably no more than 30 hours a month for Hub Plus, and it's gradually over the almost 3 years since I've retired stayed fairly consistent, but what I envisage over the next year or so is that probably disappears as well. Leaving well. How do you keep the door open once you've left? You may be absolutely exhausted when you retire, but think about how do you leave that door open? You don't know what you might want to do 6 months on, 12 months on. You don't know who you might be wanting to ask to be a referee, for example. And above all, be kind. Are you going to be approachable about your previous roles within the practice? So not obviously, but you may well be the most senior person in the practice at the time that you leave. So by osmosis, you've got a lot of knowledge. How are you going to share that? If you were, like I was, sort of finance lead, you're very much aware that things take a year plus for another set of accounts to go through. So how are you going to be approachable? How long in advance are you going to let patients know? Michael talked about this. Partly that's driven by your appointment system, partly it's driven by rotas, and different people will get to know at different times. And how are you letting them know? Again, we spoke about that. I've known friends who've let patients know quite a way in advance and had kind of a notebook that patients could write comments in. I think you have to be quite brave to do that, in a sense, don't you? But that can be a good thing to do, and that's helpful for some people. Are you having a leave-in do? What do you want that to look like if you are having one? If you are, who would you like to be there? Although often you're not the one organising it, you know, you may well want to have some people there that other partners, other colleagues might not have thought about. Have you got any thank yous to write to people? Have you got anything, sounds a bit glamorous saying motivational words, but in the same way that you as the retiree will get thank yous and nostalgic little notes, is there anything you can do to support those that are still at the coalface? If you're a partner, will you expect a set of accounts the following year? So you should expect them because you'll be named in them, and you know you've got money tied up in those. Would you expect to be invited to the annual accounts meeting? Again, you've got a right to be there, but it's going to be best part of a year on. Would you feel uncomfortable? How would your other partners feel about that? How flexible are you about when you paid out? I know our partnership accounts said 3 months. Well, that's never going to happen in a month of Sundays because, like we've already said, you know, practice accounts have dribs and drabs going in related to 2 or 3 years ago. So how flexible are you going to be about that? If you've got a lot of nous about the accounts and the finance and the state of finance of your partnership, which you should have a glimmer of knowing, do the partners need to take a loan out to be able to pay me out? And you may feel that you've got to politely push that conversation, or you could be waiting a long time. What amount are you expecting to leave in the partnership? So beyond this time we've spoken about when things are still coming in and going out, is there an amount of money that you're going to leave in the partnership to cover any liabilities? Otherwise, things being clawed back, we all know PCSE are an absolute nightmare. Have you got an agreed amount? Have a think about it. That's probably all I was going to say, really. And I know a lot of that we've already covered, and I think we can have conversations throughout the rest of the time we've got together. So I'll shut up, Claire, if that's okay.
Thank you, Gail. That's really helpful. And actually, when I left my practice as a partner about 7 years ago, I was in exactly that situation. It was, in our partnership agreements, it said you will pay, you'll get the finances sorted out, but that didn't happen until the following year after the accounts had been. And the accountant actually said you need to keep in a certain amount of money in order to be able to pay the liabilities. So the accountants, I think, are generally used to those discussions, but don't let that go by. Don't think you're in for a windfall as soon as you leave, because actually you do need to just sort of cover all bases just in case.
And I think it's a good hint if you are the senior partner or the business partner or whatever, to write to people, to write to the outgoing partner saying what they can expect from the partnership. I think committing stuff to writing, it was interesting, Michael didn't say for a little while, did he, that to write as the partner retiring, to write your intentions to the partnership. I think it's so important to have things documented, however well everyone gets on. It can be a bit Chinese whispers, so write it down.
Yeah. Thank you, Gail. That's excellent. And now I'd like to invite, we've got several representatives from the RCGP, Vale of Trent faculty. So first of all, Jane Selwyn, would you like to come and let us know your experiences, Jane? And Jane is one of the RCGP Vale of Trent late career and retired members, but also the Nottingham Med-Chi president. So welcome, Jane.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so very, very briefly, so my story. So I retired in 2018, which is 6 years ago, when I was 60, which I sort of alluded to a bit earlier. Why did I retire? Well, I retired, there are a number of reasons, of which they don't really sort of stand, I don't think, anymore. But my reasons were, one, I was 60. Two, I'd had a couple of spinal surgical procedures, which I needed to sort of completely heal from. The third thing was really the burden. I think the burden of risk. I think there was a feeling of in today's complaints culture, it felt a little bit like quit while you're still ahead. Yeah, try not to tempt to anything disastrous to happen. So I think there was a sort of feeling of that. There was definitely in those days as well, in my time anyway, the appraisal and revalidation was getting increasingly onerous. There was the issue about lifetime allowance with your pension. I had to get out of the pension scheme. As it was, I breached my lifetime allowance, and had to pay an awful lot of tax because of that. There was the issue about indemnity as well, because we were paying all our own indemnity, no Crown indemnity at that time. So I think I was paying about £10,000 a year, which is absolutely enormous. So there was that issue. And there was issues of the feelings of my husband and family. It's definitely time for me to retire and take a rest. What happened subsequently? Well, I had a bit of a disaster because a number of bereavements, father-in-law, then my husband, then my mother, then my father. As I say, I breached my lifetime allowance. I had to pay an enormous amount of tax. I'd very cleverly done my appraisal right at the last minute before I retired. So I had a whole year of being able to stay on the performance list. And then at the end of that year, after suffering all those bereavements and things, they then came after me and said, "You've got to do an appraisal." And I went, "But I haven't done any clinical work, and I can't possibly. My mum's ill and she's in hospital, and my husband's died, and and eventually I was actually forced to voluntarily, because I'd done some CCG work as a clinical lead post retirement. They wanted me to continue with my appraisal, so I was virtually forced to relinquish my license to practice. So that wasn't great. So how did I feel? Well, sorry everybody, but I felt actually my actual retirement, I mean, apart from being bereaved anyway, but my retirement was actually a bereavement, a loss of my vocation. I felt quite rudderless and directionless, emotionally vulnerable, and financially very insecure. you lose your identity, your purpose, your ability to influence, guide, support people, which in turn gives you an awful lot of reward. That loss of learning, that loss of social contacts, that loss of power. And I also, when I quit, it was a feeling of, I mean, I wanted to go. It's the right thing to do. My partners were really lovely about it. They would have liked me to have stayed. But when I actually left, it was a feeling of, my goodness, how easy it was to leave. Nobody from sort of the NHS or from the what was the CCG at the time came and said, "Are you sure you really want to leave? Can't we persuade you to stay and do something a little bit different?" There was nothing said like that. So I'm really pleased that there are so many things now in place that to try and help retain people and to try and help them do different things and to keep them engaged. So how did I navigate all this? Well, in the end, do you know what? I went back to work, and the vaccination, the COVID vaccination program was my savior. And I went back to work, and I re-engaged with people and with learning, and it was absolutely wonderful. And so for 3 years, I did that until my emergency registration ceased March last year, when I actually made the decision that it really was time to properly retire. And I felt an awful lot better about it. What else did I do? Well, I also engaged with the RCGP, and I became the secretary for 3 years. And I'm now jointly with Marilyn, the late career retired members rep. And I work at a local level with the faculty, but I also represent the faculty at a national level as well, and sit on a national, the Professional Standards Working Group Committee, which is really, really interesting, and I really enjoy it. I engaged with Meg Kai. Yes, I'm president this year as well. Took up my safeguarding role as a school governor again, having given it up a few years earlier. I'm a trustee of a couple of charities. I'm PCC secretary as well. So I'm just keeping really, really busy. So I don't think really I've got much else to say, except just on the back of what Gail was saying. One thing to think about is how you're going to celebrate your retirement. That's actually quite a nice thing to think about, how you're going to celebrate it with your staff and with your partners. So think about that. Do think about appraisal, and I do think, as I say, I timed my last appraisal, so it was right at the end when I retired, so I had a whole year to be able to sit and think about actually what I was going to do, which I think was a beneficial thing. And just another point, I found, apart from telling patients that I was going to retire, which I found really traumatic and really emotionally quite wearing, was clearing out my room. I found that incredibly traumatic. All my things I'd had there for years and years and years, all my books and things, taking them all out, taking them all home. And it was a bit like, oh my goodness, what's this all about? So just beware that. And I agree with you, Claire. I think intention to retire needs to be done formally in a letter stating what you're going to do and when you're going to do it, I think, for the record. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Gail. Jane, beg your pardon. Gail, come on in.
Jane, on that point of clearing your room, my tip is leave a bar of chocolate in your desk drawer for whoever gets the room next. It's, I don't know, you can be a kind chocolate fairy.
Lovely idea, and thanks for being sharing everything with us, Jane. Any questions so far for Jane or Gail?
Well, actually, the other thing I did, sorry, the one thing I forgot to mention, which I found incredibly therapeutic, was I took my fellowship. I applied for fellowship, and I found that an amazing experience in that it allowed me time to reflect on my career. It was really cathartic. And on both of my careers, my actual general practice career, but also my vaccination career as well, and that really, really helped me. So that's another thing that people might want to think about if they haven't done it already.
Thank you. Subhash, come on in.
Hi Jane, good to see you. Me and Jane, we worked in a time in the CCG
And our kids are at school together.
yes, yeah, those were the days, yeah.
Mm.
So obviously, I see a bunch of huge lot of experience, and it is really kind of quite bad for the NHS to lose this thing. We all agree to that. You know, when I'm coming down and I'm thinking about that, I've got about 5 or 6 more years to go. And so I'm thinking about that. How can I try to plan my life after my clinical work is done? So, where do I go to people to say, this is what I am, this is what I have done, and this is my experience? Can you consult? Can I have a consultation about what roles can I be interested, or what roles can I do?
I guess this is what our fourth session is going to cover, the opportunities that are around.
Yeah, the third one. That's why. Yeah,
Third
it would be definitely. But any ideas about, because lots of people, when they have worked, they have gathered a significant amount of experience, and they would like to give back, to share, and things are there. So, because when you are a partner in the GP practice and you're working full time, you are quite committed to your clinical work. Means I have been in the CCG for many years. I've been a clinical lead in the Nottinghamshire area, and I'm a GP trainer now for quite a lot of registrars and stuff. But I sometimes feel that, yeah, I've got things to contribute and I would like to do so. Like to keep my head going, keep my grey cells, in gear.
Jane, were you coming in to respond to that?
Well, I was on that, and Subhash, I completely understand that. I identify with that. That's exactly when you've been a really busy. I was a full-time partner with lots of other roles on the CCG governing body, a clinical lead. Done lots and lots of different things. It's actually really difficult to step back from that, and you've got so much experience and so much goodwill and so much to give. How can you utilize that?
You got it. Yeah.
You don't want to do any more clinical work. It is really quite difficult to know how to progress that. Now, what I was going to go on and say was that actually, and Marina will back me up, is that as part of the National Late Career and Retired Member Group, we are trying to develop a support package for late career retiring members about how to get some support and how to get some advice and where to go. We're trying to do out this package of information, and that's going to be published on the RCGP website. So I don't know whether you're still a member of the RCGP, but
yeah, I am.
Right, and hopefully that is going to happen really quite soon. So that might be a source of information and help.
Yeah, great, thanks.
David, come on in.
Yeah, this is something we will be talking about in the session in 3 weeks' time. It's partly to do with identity and how you see yourself, and realizing that because you've been a doctor for 30 years, okay, it's an interesting, fantastic job to do, but there's lots of other things you can do. And that's not the only way you can spend your time when you retire from your practice. And so, although it's clearly a choice for individuals, and I, for example, I've done stuff in the college, and I was a volunteer vaccinator during COVID for a year, which I very much enjoyed. But I've got so much time to develop other interests and things that I put on hold many years ago. So it's worth reflecting on the totality of what you can do, rather than thinking you necessarily have to go back into medicine, unless that is what you want to do. Now, incidentally, the business about the performance list for staying on is because if you do decide you want to go back and you need it, it's a real pain to get back on if you've come off. I had this experience myself when I volunteered to be a vaccinator, and I said, yeah, I'll do that. I thought they'd ring me up and say, can you start tomorrow? Oh no, I had to have 3 interviews and do all the learning about how, you know, what to do in a fire or how to lift things without hurting myself and all that sort of stuff. Whereas if I was still on the performers list, I could have just started. So that's really what I'm saying, is that it's worth stepping back a bit. I'm not saying at all that if medicine is the something you want to carry on, because there's lots of things you can do, but remember that there are other things that you can do to enrich your life that are not to do with the work you've been doing for the last 30 years. Last thing I would say is I think it'd be really good if somebody wrote to everyone who retires from the NHS and just said thank you. That does not happen. Nobody will say that to you. Well, your partners might, of course, but nobody, maybe Wes Streeting will, who knows? But certainly, it's just like when you walk out the door, it's scary, as we've heard, because you think, who am I? What am I going to do? And, you know, all that sort of thing. Anyway, I'll stop. Felt I needed to say that. Thanks.
Just on that
Thank
point,
you.
actually, David, is that if the LMC know that you're retiring, they will often contact you as a
Yes.
thank you. And if anybody is working with people who've been in service for the NHS for 20, 25 years, you know,
Yeah.
again, if you let the LMC know, or if one of your partners or colleagues lets them know, they will then probably send you a card to thank you for your
Oh,
long
I don't know.
service. Yeah, that's Nottingham LMC. I don't know if Derbyshire does it, but it's I think they do long-term service kind of recognition as well.
Oh, that's lovely. Lovely. Yeah.
Jane, do you want to come on quickly, and then I'll
Yeah, I was just going to say, is that a new thing, Claire? Because I completely agree with David. Is that, you know, your patients, your staff, your partners all say, "Well done, thank you very much," blah blah blah, which is lovely. But the one person that never says thank you is the NHS, and it is really, well, I found it really quite upsetting, galling. There's no recognition at all. You walk away into the, you know, into the dust, and you give all that time. So it's nice to hear the LMC do that. I'm not sure that they did it in my day.
I think it's incredibly difficult to find out, because certainly when I was on Derbyshire LMC, we wanted to do that. And likewise with Task Force and Hub Plus, we really wanted to send cards to people. Just a plug for Hub Plus has now got a long service awards thing. So if there's anybody you know of, you know, let us know. But the data around all our detail, it just stops all this stuff dead. You know, I tried to ask, having been an appraiser for years, tried to ask of the revalidation appraisal team, could we be told if someone was retiring? And of course the answer is no. And so it has to be very much word of mouth. So I suppose if we could encourage the practices that we work within to let the local LMCs know, that's one way of acknowledging colleagues who've done a tremendous amount of work. It's not for want of trying, I think, is the answer to that one.
Yeah, thanks. And just to finish off what Subhash suggested, Subhash, do join up for the rest of the sessions, because the Psychological Transitions workshop will definitely address some of the things that you mentioned. And also the 4th session is very much about opportunities and what to do sort of in late career. So I'd just like to bring Margaret in to give her experience, and then we'll go into breakout rooms just briefly, just to kind of reflect on some of the things that you've heard. So Margaret, come on in.
Okay, thank you. I think what I'd like to do is just share how I did plan for my retirement. So I had an academic post and I was also a GP partner. And as anybody here in the room has got 2 half-time posts, you know that they're far more than 2 half-time posts, and you know, life was a bit crazy. So I gave up my academic post and I reduced my hours, and I went down to 6 sessions a week in the practice and just focused the last few years of my working life on my practice where I felt the need was greatest. And the great thing about that was that I got 1 whole day off a week. You know, I did the 6 sessions over 4 days. So we all know what it's like when you're working a morning, you know, it's 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock by the time you manage to get away. But I did get a whole day a week off. And so what I started to do was, you know, take up some sort of classes at my local gym and get involved in, you know, hobby. For example, you know, I'm really into theatre and movies and started doing more of that. Marilyn, who's on the meeting, gave me some advice. She's a friend, and I listed all the roles that I did within the practice, because what I realized was all my partners had young children, and as every new thing needed to be done, I felt sorry for them all, because you know what it's like when you've got young kids. I say, oh, I'll do that. And I think we were all shocked when I presented the list of all the roles that I had got in the practice, which then needed to be taken over by my colleagues. But at least we identified those roles and we planned for who was going to do them, and prepared people at least 6 months in advance of me leaving. I think I left a practice in the Northeast when I relocated to Nottingham, so I've already left a whole load of patients and been through that emotional turmoil. So I realized that it's not good to do it too far in advance, because you prolong the emotional turmoil for patients and yourself, actually. So with 6 weeks to go, we put up a big sign letting people know that I was retiring from the practice. And I thought that worked very well. I did not want any sort of coffee morning or patients coming or anything like that. It was literally just letting them all know that I was going, and it was lovely, you know, that patients would write me a little card, and there were a few small gifts, but nothing, you know, huge. And that is exactly how it should be. You know, at the end of the day, you know, it is a job. I know we become very close to our patients because of the privileged position that we have and the interactions we have. But certainly just a card saying thank you for, you know, obviously saving my little boy when he had meningococcal septicemia, that sort of thing. That was lovely. I also made sure that I started sharing the care of terminally ill patients. Obviously, the wider nursing team and Macmillan are heavily involved, but there is also a GP has to have oversight of that. And so I identified all my terminally ill patients, or people who are likely to be terminal, to make sure that the care of those patients started to be shared with a colleague, so that it wasn't such a huge shock for those patients. And then finally, I did not get enough financial advice. And like Jane, I made a couple of errors over the time I retired and the nature of my retirement, and ended up with a big tax bill. So can I say I happily pay my taxes, but you actually can get double taxed if you have what they call a second crystallization event for your pension, which I've never even heard of. And I got caught out with that. So do seek financial advice. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. I can't say I've ever heard of the second crystallization effect either, so I'm going to go and look at that now. Marilyn, come on in.
Yeah, I've just got one sentence that hasn't been covered. One thing I would say is, you think about retirement as, you know, leaving your being a doctor and changing your role. But one thing I'd just like to say is, try and think of it the other way around as well. You know, what you want for your rest of your life, and have you got time to do it? Don't assume that you're going to be able to do all the things that you've been, as David said, storing up and on the back burner, that you're going to be healthy enough to do that and have enough time to do it. As soon as I retired, I developed breast cancer, and it's just a different way of looking at it, you know, to look at all the things you want to do outside of medicine, and have you got enough time to do that, or enough opportunity to do it, rather than thinking, oh, I'm still enjoying my job, I'll do it for a few more years, and just putting it off. So that's just a different perspective to just think about.
Thank you, Marilyn. And David, anything else to add to what's been said?
No. Nothing at all.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for your sort of personal reflections, and particularly the really things, the important things that you have, handed on as top tips and things, pitfalls to avoid. That's really useful to know. What I'm going to suggest we do now, we're close to the end, but I thought we might just give you a few minutes just to kind of reflect on some of the things in smaller groups, just to give you the chance to think about things. So I'm just going to see if I can share my screen just for a moment. Okay. And try and get the right screen. Oh yeah, I put in the chat that I'm going to give you a list of all the tasks and things that need to be done, just to show you that that's what that looks like. But then thinking about, sorry, oh yes, there we go. You can either in your breakout rooms just reflect on what's been said and ask any questions that you would like to ask, or there are 3 questions here if you want to take a photograph. If you want to sort of start talking about any of those, that's absolutely fine, or take those away with you. So just going to come out of that for a moment. So just going to stop sharing. And then I'm going to put you in breakout rooms. I'm just going to give you 10 minutes just to sort of reflect on that before we come back and then head towards the end. So thank you for your staying power so far. So hopefully everybody will end up in a room, but if you don't, please let me know. So I'm opening up the rooms now, and you should get an invitation to join. Any thoughts or reflections? I know it's a fairly brief chance to talk. Any thoughts from anybody?
Well, just a couple of things we covered in our brief time was that it is a bit different whether you're a partner or salaried, and maybe we've been heavy on the partners in this session. And the other thing is that I don't think we've mentioned was about thinking about revalidation and doing all your questionnaires and things early to give you options.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And actually, I would definitely agree. I think there is a lot of information to take out from there. Perhaps, next time we'll think about putting partners together and having salaries a kind of different emphasis. So, but hopefully people will have had something to take away from that. And we'll certainly feed that back. David.
Yeah, we 2 other things I think we covered. One is that it does help to spend as long as you need thinking about retirement and starting when you're ready to think about it, even if you're not going to sort of make the final step until you've got everything in your head. With workshops like this, but the BMA do them and all the rest of it. So that's the other thing. And we talked about tax and the uncertainty about what bills you might be sent in the future, and how frustrating it can be, and the balance between having all those ducks in a row and considering where you are in your life and sort of taking a jump, keeping your fingers crossed, I guess, and seeing what comes out in the wash.
And how difficult it is to get your pension estimates.
Yeah, I mean, I think one take-home message, and this will come probably from our 3rd session when we talk about our finances and pensions, is actually to start planning early. Find out, from PCSE where you are, and if you've got gaps, then get those gaps sorted as soon as you possibly can, because that can certainly delay the process considerably. Yeah. And in terms of revalidation and appraisals, you're absolutely right. I think in terms of trying to keep doors open, it's always worth going with the appraisals and revalidation process if you think there's even a tiny chance that you might want to do something clinical. Okay, as David said before, it's more difficult to come back in than it is to actually keep the door open. So that would be my sort of tip there. So we're kind of coming to the end, and I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight. Just want to say that our next webinar, is actually going to be a workshop, which is looking at the psychological transitions in late career, and leading towards retirement. So it's a really interactive workshop. I've been to Alexis Hutson's workshop before, and David will be joining us again, and it's absolutely fantastic. So in terms of thinking about what you want and what you want your identity to be sort of in late career and beyond, this is a really great workshop to attend. So if you haven't signed up for it on the 29th of January, please do join us. There are limited spaces to that one, and we won't be recording it because, of course, you know, there may be some sort of sensitive information that is shared there. And then following that, we've got the finance one, and then the fourth one will be looking at exploring lots of different options locally and nationally to give you some ideas of the types of things as a late career GP you can do that doesn't necessarily require retirement, but there will be some talk about retirement and options beyond retirement there as well. So are there any final questions? Any final thoughts? Well, thank you for joining. As is always customary, I'd like to thank everybody who has contributed and also for joining. But you'll see that in the chat there is a feedback link. We would really love to know what you kind of later sort of career GPs would like from us in terms of support. So this will take you literally about oh, Phil, never mind. I'm sure you'll have a lovely time. But come back in one piece. Have a great time skiing. Yeah, so if we could trouble you for 1 or 2 minutes of for feedback, that would be amazing. And there is a QR code which I'll share with you if I can find it. Yeah, that's coming up now. So if people prefer using QR codes, then that's the QR code just coming up. So thank you in advance for feeding that for filling that in for us. And I'm just going to stay on for a couple of minutes. If anybody's got anything that they want to say, then feel free to do so. But otherwise, good night to everybody. I'm going to stop sharing now, and thank you very much for coming.
Good night and good luck, everyone.
Good night. Oh, I don't seem to be able to stop sharing now. So there we go. Thank you. Have a lovely rest of the evening, and hopefully see you at one of our other webinars.
Thanks very much, Claire.
Thank you, Jane.
Do you want us to stay on for a little bit?
Just a moment or two.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Claire, do you want us to do the feedback forms?
If you would like to, that would be really helpful. Yes, please. Or you can feed back to me verbally now. That would be equally fine. Whatever you prefer. Phil, is there anything that you would like to?
No, I'm just trying to find the button to leave.
Find the off button. I'm not sure if I can eject you from the meeting.
It was so easy to leave.
It's always nice catching up with everyone, actually, because I feel like one of the old lags, but I'm still going. So
you're a youngster, Phil.
I know. I was just saying to in the breakout room about our journey back from Glasgow.
Oh my God. God.
Putting the world to rights.
Definitely. Yeah.
Anyway, the traitors is beckoning. I'm sorry, I'm going to go.
Yeah, good for you.
Bye, Phil.
Thank you.
Bye.
Nice to see you, Phil. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your time. And I definitely take on board, Marilyn and Margaret, your comments about it being quite sort of partner heavy.
In my breakout room, we had one partner who was a senior partner and had sort of various thoughts. I mean, and this was very helpful for her, I think, giving her lots of things to think about. But the other girl was a salary partner. She said, well, it really doesn't matter quite. So it's easier. Basically, I just have to give 3 months notice or whatever. And no problems with partnership agreements, etc., which is great, isn't it? But I still think it gave food for thought.
Yeah, and I hope it'll inspire people to sort of come to some of the other sessions because it might be a bit more relevant to them.
Yeah,
you know,
but it's about preparation, and it's about all the other practical things, isn't it? And it's about how you're going to feel as an individual when you retire. So,
and even getting your pension in order and knowing where that is a big thing for many people. So hopefully that will be taken away.
Yeah, somebody in our breakout room said they were 3 years behind.
Yeah.
Yes.
What?
Well, that's not surprising. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So Claire, when you do the financial bit, is the person there going to sort of focus on salaried as well as partners, because really the partnership finances are on a different plane to a salaried doctor leaving.
Yeah, I mean the brief is to do both, obviously,
Right.
but
Okay.
it's to do with things like the McLeod judgment and
Yes.
kinds of things,
Well,
which is
that
relevant
applies to everybody. Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Any other feedback? Any sort of initial thoughts or
No.
anything?
Well, anyway, you've all learnt about the second crystallization event tonight.
Yeah, yes, indeed.
Well, I'm going to go and read it up. So thank you for enlightening me on that.
Email me.
Sorry that you had to go through it.
Margaret, Margaret, presumably that's not. Is it relevant still now? I mean, my lifetime allowance obviously is no longer relevant because it's you know your pension is no longer capped. So
it might not be relevant now.
No,
might not be relevant now.
The trouble is, I was saying to Claire earlier, we are such dinosaurs, unfortunately, that things have changed enormously.
I mean, I only retired. You only retired recently, Jane, and I only retired 2 years ago, so it's not that long ago.
No, but appraisals have changed, and revalidation has changed, indemnities changed.